We call them solved. The courts delivered their verdict, the files were closed, but justice, it's not always clear-cut. That murky territory where the law says, case closed, but the public says, well, hold on, not so fast. These are the cases where something still doesn't feel right, where evidence is questioned, where guilt or innocence is still debated in whispers over beers or behind locked doors. These aren't cold cases, but they're far from warm. G'day, kia ora, and hello. Welcome back to what is officially the Shadow Matter 100th episode. If you're new around here, this is a channel where we talk about a darker side of our world with a focus on stories and cases from Australia and New Zealand here every second Sunday. If that sounds like something you're interested in, then click that subscribe button. Don't worry, it won't bite you. Oh, and it's free. So yeah, 100 episodes. I didn't think we'd make it this far, but here we are. Thanks to you all. Really appreciate all the support and hope you're still enjoying the content. And I really hope you enjoy this one because it's going to be a goodie. This is a continuation of my New Zealand murder series. If you missed the last episode, a link in description below. One of my favorite subjects is mysteries that surround officially solved cases. The old classic whodunit, the wrong man, or shadows of doubt. These are New Zealand's 5 most doubted or debated, controversially, solved murders. Put your kids to bed, tell Nana you'll call her back tomorrow, and set your notifications to silent. It's about to get dark in here. Number 5, the Fuller Sandys and Leah Stevens case, aka the Gone Fishing case. And something is definitely fishy about this one. Auckland, August 1989, 21-year-old Dean Fuller Sandys heads out fishing at Whatipu Beach. He never returns. His car is found strewn with fishing gear, but no body. 5 days later, Leah Stevens, a 20-year-old sex worker, disappears from Upper Queen Street. Her skeletal remains are found by accident 3 years later in the Muriwai forest. For nearly a decade, the disappearances are treated as unrelated tragedies. That's when a theory emerges. In '97, 8 years after the fact, police reopened the case. They unveiled a radical theory. Gail Maney, a former sex worker, allegedly believed Fuller Sandys burgled her flat in Henderson, stealing drugs and clothing. Detectives claim she ordered a hit on him, hiring Stephen Stone, aged 19. That Fuller Sandys was allegedly lured to her garage, shot in front of a group, including Leah Stevens, who later became a witness. To silence her, Stone allegedly abducted, raped, and murdered Stevens. Her body found 3 years later in bushland. There was no body, no forensic evidence. The entire case rested on witness testimony, given many years later. In 1999, both Stone and Maney were convicted for Fuller Sandys' murder. Stone was also convicted of murdering Stevens. Maney's brother, Colin, and acquaintance Mark Henriksen were convicted as accessories. In 2000, Maney was retried and convicted again. But cracks began to show. 2 key witness accounts were recanted, stating they'd been pressured by police. Another admitted lying under duress. The Crown failed to disclose 2 vital documents that would have undermined the credibility of key witnesses. Despite the severity of accusations, murder, rape, body disposal, no forensic evidence was ever presented. Dean's body was never found. Leah's remains showed no obvious trauma, no fingerprints, no murder weapon, not even a single DNA sample. The prosecution's entire case relied on rumor-based testimony from associates, dubbed fantasy witnesses by investigator Tim McKinnell. By August 2024, the Crown admitted that a miscarriage of justice had occurred due to non-disclosure and unreliable witness statements. In October 2024, the Court of Appeal formally quashed the convictions of Gail Maney, Colin Maney, and Mark Henriksen, all declared not guilty. Stephen Stone was granted bail, and while a retrial was initially ordered by April 2025, the Crown conceded there was insufficient evidence to retry him for either crime. He too was acquitted and released. Today, all 4 are legally innocent, but the question remains, what really happened to Dean Fuller Sandys and Leah Stevens? Were they victims of 2 unrelated tragedies? No murder at all? Was the case built on fabricated evidence, crumpled under pressure? Well, it certainly sounds like it. Did police manufacture a narrative to justify decades of missing bodies and open investigation files? Are the real killers still at large? Former detective Mark Franklin, later jailed for drug offences, led the original investigation. Critics argued he coerced witnesses and sculpted statements to support a predetermined theory. Now, Mark Franklin was as dodgy as they come. This guy was caught smoking cannabis while on duty in the force, got caught smuggling drugs in the Pacific Islands after he retired, but still, goes to show how crooked he really was. 4 lives ruined by convictions built on rumor, unreliable witnesses, and no physical proof. Each spent years behind bars, only to be told decades later that the state got it wrong. There are still no bodies, no weapon, no confession, just reputations destroyed, families shattered, and questions that keep echoing. Who killed Dean and Leah? Was justice served, or completely missing in action? Number 4, the Scott Guy case. July 8th, 2010, a foggy winter morning in Feilding, New Zealand. Scott Guy, a young father, husband, and local farmer, stepped out of his home around 5 a.m. to begin his daily milking. Just hours later, his lifeless body was discovered at the end of his driveway, slumped beside his ute. He had been shot once in the neck at close range. The scene looked clinical. No sign of struggle, no defensive wounds, nothing taken. Whoever had done this, they came to kill. And in a town where everyone knows your name, suspicion doesn't have far to travel. Scott Guy was part of a tight-knit farming family. He worked on the property alongside his parents and his brother-in-law, Ewan McDonald. But behind the early morning milking sessions and family barbecues, things were far from harmonious. Tensions brewed between Scott and Ewan. Disputes over succession plans, roles on the farm, and future direction created a quiet but bitter rivalry. According to those close to them, Scott was poised to take over the farm, a move that left McDonald on uncertain footing. Then came the vandalism. Months before the murder, someone destroyed Scott and Kylie Guy's new home, slashing insulation and smashing walls. Their letterbox was blown up, and 2 pet calves were slaughtered. Police would later uncover that McDonald had been secretly behind these attacks, a revelation that shifted him from quiet brother-in-law to prime suspect. McDonald was arrested nearly a year later in April 2011 and charged with murder. Investigators believed the motive was clear: resentment and jealousy. McDonald had allegedly grown furious at Scott's increasing influence on the farm and feared being pushed out by his in-laws. But there were cracks in the prosecution's case. There was no murder weapon, no eyewitnesses, and crucially, no forensic evidence tying McDonald to the shooting. Instead, the Crown leaned on circumstantial elements: McDonald's history of covert violence, his evasiveness during interviews, the idea that his knowledge of the farm layout would allow him to strike and vanish without leaving a trace. Even the timeline was circumstantial. Ewan claimed to be out on a paddock riding on a quad bike at the time of the murder, a claim investigators found dubious, given the weather and the hour. Yeah, why would you be out there in the dark, just hooning around on a quad bike at that hour of the morning, and in the foggy weather as well? But yeah, well, they couldn't disprove it. The 2012 trial was a media spectacle. Kylie Guy, Scott's widow, sat stoically as Ewan McDonald was tried not only for murder, but for arson, vandalism, and animal cruelty. Those charges, unrelated to the killing, were used to paint a picture of a man capable of calculated malice. The courtroom was split. Some saw McDonald as a cunning manipulator hiding behind his family name. Others saw a rush to judgment, a desperate attempt by police to pin a murder on someone already proven to be a liar. In the end, the jury reached a verdict: not guilty of murder. Ewan McDonald was acquitted. Despite the acquittal, suspicion continues to swirl around Ewan McDonald. Even the judge described him as duplicitous. He served time for the other crimes: the sabotage, the calf killings, the arson, but walked free in 2015. To this day, no one else has been charged with Scott Guy's murder, and McDonald has never spoken publicly about the case, refusing interviews, maintaining his innocence, and disappearing from public life. Was he the man who pulled the trigger in the fog that morning? Or is Scott Guy's real killer still out there? In the end, what remains is a family torn apart, a widow left without answers, and a rural town haunted by silence. Number 3, the Lundy murders. It was August 30th, 2000, when a quiet street in Palmerston North turned into a bloodbath. Christine Lundy and her 7-year-old daughter Amber were found savagely murdered in their family home. The scene was beyond brutal. Christine had been struck at least 7 times in the head. Amber, just a child, suffered multiple blows. The murder weapon was never found, but the level of violence suggested a rage-fueled frenzy, and suspicion quickly turned to the man who'd been out of town that night: Christine's husband, Mark Edward Lundy. Mark Lundy claimed he had been in Wellington that evening on a business trip to pitch his new product, a line of vineyard equipment, to investors. Receipts showed him checking into a motel just before 5:30 p.m. He ordered an escort that evening, then claimed he spent the rest of the night alone. But a witness came forward with a chilling claim. They saw a man running from the Lundy home around 7:15 p.m. wearing a blonde wig. Another witness said they spotted Lundy's distinctive vehicle on the highway around 8 p.m. heading back toward Palmerston North. Then came the most damning statement. A neighbour claimed to have seen Mark Lundy in the window of his own house at 7 p.m. The prosecution's case was built not just on timelines, but on a shirt. A polo shirt, to be exact, was found in the boot of Lundy's car, stained with what experts initially identified as human brain matter, allegedly Christine's. That, they argued, placed Lundy at the scene of the crime, wielding the murder weapon. But the science was shaky from the start. The forensic expert, Rod Miller, used a controversial and rarely peer-reviewed technique to identify brain tissue, a technique that no New Zealand or international lab had ever verified for use in court. And that's where the cracks began to show. In 2002, Mark Lundy was convicted of both murders and sentenced to life in prison. But that wasn't the end of the story. New evidence and legal challenges mounted. Experts questioned the science used to convict him, calling it junk forensics. Others pointed out flaws in the timeline. Could Lundy have driven the 2-hour round trip between Wellington and Palmerston North, committed the murders, cleaned up, and returned in time to establish an alibi? In 2013, the Privy Council quashed Lundy's convictions, citing that the brain matter evidence should never have been presented to the jury. He was granted a retrial. At the 2015 retrial, prosecutors abandoned the brain tissue theory entirely. Instead, they focused on DNA evidence and new forensic testimony that suggested Christine's DNA had been found on the same shirt. The timeline also shifted. Prosecutors argued the murders had occurred earlier in the day, allowing Lundy more time to make the alleged round trip from Wellington. Despite lingering doubts, Mark Lundy was convicted again. To this day, the case divides the nation. Some see Mark Lundy as a manipulative husband who butchered his family to claim insurance money and escape financial ruin. Others believe he was railroaded by bad science, unreliable witnesses, and a legal system desperate for a conviction. The man in the window, was it really Lundy? Or a case of mistaken identity, twisted by grief and memory? The shirt, the smoking gun, or contaminated evidence? The drive, possible or implausible? And perhaps the most haunting of all, why kill Amber? If it was rage, what could justify turning that rage on a child? Even with 2 guilty verdicts, Mark Lundy's name still echoes with doubt. Number 2, the Bain family murders. Dunedin, New Zealand, June 20th, 1994. A blood-soaked tragedy unfolds inside a modest home at 65 Every Street. By morning, 5 members of the Bain family are dead. Only one survives, 22-year-old David Bain. His mother Margaret, father Robin, sisters Arawa and Laniette, and 14-year-old brother Stephen are all discovered executed, each with a single gunshot wound, most while they slept. The weapon, a .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle. The time of the murders, early morning, before dawn. The killer had moved room to room, methodical, cold, and calculated. David, the eldest child, returns from his paper run to find the bodies. He calls emergency services in a distressed, almost rehearsed panic. Quote, "They're all dead. I came home and they're all dead." End quote. At first, David is treated as a surviving witness, not a suspect, but the evidence is strange. Police arrived at 65 Every Street to find a bloodbath. Robin Bain, the father, was found in the lounge slumped forward in a kneeling position with the family rifle beside him. The scene appeared to suggest he had taken his own life, but the placement of the body and the weapon raised eyebrows from the outset. The rest of the family had been methodically executed, each shot at close range in their bedrooms. David claimed to have discovered the bodies after returning from his delivery route, but something wasn't adding up. Police find a cryptic message typed on a family computer. It reads, "Sorry, you are the only one who deserved to stay." It was found to be typed at around 6:44 a.m., just minutes before David claimed he arrived home. Police believe this was a fabricated Side note, left to suggest that Robin had killed his family before turning the gun on himself. But the timing cast suspicion. Could Robin have composed that message and then taken his own life, all before David got home? Or did David, the only surviving member of the household, write it himself? When David was taken in for witness statements and questioning, police documented what appeared to be scratches and bruises on his body. Had he possibly struggled with one of the victims? Another damning detail, a pair of glasses found broken in David's bedroom. One lens was missing. That missing lens was later discovered in Stephen's blood-smeared room, where signs of a violent struggle were evident. David claimed they weren't his, but it was proven that he had borrowed them from his mother due to issues with his vision. If the lens was in Stephen's room, how did it get there? Police claimed it was proof that David had been in the room during the murders. Perhaps the most compelling piece of evidence, bloody sock prints found leading away from the murder scenes. Forensic analysis showed the prints matched David's foot size and were consistent with someone walking, not running. The direction and location of the prints suggested someone had moved through the house after the killings, possibly cleaning or staging the scene. But here's the twist. The carpet holding these prints was destroyed when the Bain family home was deliberately burned down 2 weeks later. The house at 65 Every Street was destroyed in a controlled fire carried out by the fire service at the request of extended Bain family members 2 weeks after the murders. The public reason? To erase a place of trauma. But the cost was significant. The fire destroyed potential evidence, including the carpet where the bloody sock prints were found. The Teatro Encyclopedia later noted that this destroyed one of the most critical pieces of forensic evidence in David's conviction. The family's .22 caliber rifle, known to be used by both Robin and David, was found next to Robin's body. No fingerprints were recovered from the gun. Robin was wearing gloves, but no gunshot residue was found on his hands. Just another thought, why would you be wearing gloves if that was your motive, if that was your MO? If you're gonna go kill your family and then say goodbye, why the gloves? What's the point? The rifle had been reloaded multiple times, which required calm, deliberate action, and police thought the same. They argued the positioning of the rifle was staged. When police arrived, David was found chanting, shaking, and seemingly distressed, but his behavior raised questions. He had washed a full load of laundry after supposedly discovering the bodies. He turned off the house alarm, which could have detected an intruder. His emotional state was described by some officers as over the top, while others believed it was genuine. And then there was the premonition. Yeah, David had reportedly told friends he had a dream about something bad happening to his family just days before. Coincidence or a sign of forethought? David's supporters argued that his father Robin had the motive. Robin was estranged from his wife and living in a caravan on the property. Daughter Laniette had recently returned home and was, according to some witnesses, preparing to reveal an incestuous relationship with her father. On the night before the murders, she reportedly confided in friends about her plans to, quote, blow the whistle. Could Robin have murdered his family to silence her and then turned the gun on himself? But critics argued that there was no forensic evidence linking Robin to the murders, and his body was too clean for someone who had just executed 4 people. David Bain was convicted of 5 counts of murder in 1995 and sentenced to life in prison. But after years of appeals, and thanks in part to a growing chorus of public support, including from former All Black Joe Karam, David's conviction was quashed. In 2009, a retrial was held. After a dramatic courtroom battle, David Bain was found not guilty on all counts. But even now, the case remains a flashpoint of debate in New Zealand's collective memory. Was justice finally served? Or did a killer walk free? By the way, if you want to see a full-on doco in the style of Shadow Matter on that case, then please let me know in the comments. I've been wanting to do one for a while now, but I didn't know if you guys would be interested, so yeah, let me know. Numero uno, the Sounds murders. Ben Smart, Olivia Hope, Guy Wallace, Scott Watson, Furno Lodge, Mystery Catch, A Mystery Man, Tiger Blanket. These words were forever etched into the Kiwi cultural zeitgeist during the unfolding of this horrific tragedy in the late 90s. A local mystery, a journalist's dream, a parent's worst nightmare. The classic whodunit. A young affluent teenage couple mysteriously vanished from an idyllic holiday spot a hunt for the killer, and then a suspect persecuted through the eyes of the public. It's a biggie, and it's possibly New Zealand's most talked about and debated murder case. The Sounds murders of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope. New Year's Eve 1997, a time of fireworks, flowing booze, and new beginnings. In the Marlborough Sounds at Furneaux Lodge, the night promised exactly that. But by morning, 2 young lives had vanished: Ben Smart, Olivia Hope. Names forever etched into New Zealand's collective memory, but what really happened in the dark waters of Endeavour Inlet, and was justice ever truly served? Because decades later, long after the trial, the conviction, and the headlines, the truth remains as murky as the sea that swallowed them. Olivia was 17, Ben 21. They'd been celebrating at the lodge, but when it came time to head back to their yacht, the yacht that Olivia had paid for to stay overnight, was taken up with freeloaders, so they accepted a lift. They were seen boarding a small water taxi with a driver, a few other partygoers, and a mysterious unshaven man. Witnesses described him as creepy, unsettling, someone no one recognised from the lodge. The water taxi was operated at the time by a temp staff member by the name of Guy Wallace. He dropped all 3 at a yacht, but not the Tamarack, the boat they were supposed to return to, which had all the berths taken up by freeloaders. Instead, the mysterious man directed the water taxi to another vessel, a blue and white ketch, as described by the witnesses, and invited Olivia and Ben on board. Ben and Olivia were never seen again. The next day, when Ben or Olivia had not been seen, the alarm was raised, and what followed was a missing person search that over the next few days turned into a homicide investigation. Apparently too big of a case for the local Blenheim police in Marlborough, the case was headed by experienced homicide detective Rob Pope from Christchurch. Now this is where the investigation takes a strange turn. Everybody, and I mean everybody, thinks they are looking for a blue and white ketch, a mysterious yacht that no one can seem to find. Well, soon after, Rob Pope's team haul this out of the Marlborough Sounds. Does that look like the witness description to you? By the way, that paint was new. On the night of the murders, the sloop was red, so wrong colour, but we'll get back to that point soon. Now, Guy Wallace, the water taxi driver from earlier, was called in for interviews and was pretty much told he was a liar about the mystery man he witnessed and also the boat that Olivia and Ben got onto. Other witnesses were interviewed and one name kept popping up: Scott Watson. Scott Watson was a local man from Picton, a boat builder with a passion for boating. He also came with a rough edge and a criminal past, mostly burglary and petty theft. But in the 10 years leading up to this, he was relatively squeaky clean. He was at the party on the night of the murders and was seen by many witnesses, but could not be positively identified as the mystery man that every other witness claimed to have seen. However, police zeroed in quickly. They scoured his yacht called Blade, took samples, and seized his belongings. But here's where the case takes a darker turn, one that still haunts courtroom analysts and seasoned detectives alike. Because for all the resources thrown at the case, for all the public pressure to find the monster behind the disappearance, nothing concrete tied Watson to the crime. No eyewitnesses could confirm Ben or Olivia ever set foot on Blade. No forensic evidence placed them there. No motive was established. Yet somehow, Scott Watson became the face of their disappearance and eventually their presumed killer. Phones were bugged, the Watson family was hounded by the police, and the police even helped substantiate rumors of incest within the family. I mean, they basically bullied them to try to get them to fold. Eventually, Scott Watson was arrested and brought to trial. The trial was a massive one. Public interest was at an all-time high, and all news outlets were covering the story. Witnesses were brought forward, and some, like Guy Wallace, even folded under police pressure to identify Watson as the killer. Timelines couldn't be established conclusively, and neither could the witnesses' description of Watson. But the prosecution, or the Crown in this case, had a silver bullet: 2 blonde hairs. Weeks after the initial forensic search of Blade, investigators claimed to have found them, caught in a blanket buried among fibers. DNA analysis pointed to Olivia Hope. By the way, the blanket was searched twice with nothing found, and it wasn't until the 3rd search was conducted that the hairs emerged. The hairs described were 15 to 20 centimeters long. How could they suddenly appear after Olivia's reference samples were brought into the lab? Why had the bag containing the blanket been opened, resealed, and then examined again. It was noted by the defense that the bag did have a small rip in it, but depending on how 2 blonde hairs could easily fall out of it is debatable. Remember, only 2 of 400 hairs found on Scott Watson's bedding matched Olivia Hope. Only 1 hair produced a definitive result. The hair was found to be 28,000 times more likely to have come from Olivia than another fair-haired New Zealand woman. The other hair, however, produced a mixed result, indicating contamination and suggesting it could have come from Olivia or a maternal relative. Now, 28,000 times sounds like a lot, but it's not even that high in terms of DNA matches in forensic science. Take the Australian murder case of Peter Falconio, for example. Bradley John Murdoch was suspected of killing and abducting. DNA found on a victim's shirt linked him to the crime, and it was found to be 150 quadrillion times more likely. So you put those together in comparison and you can see with 28,000 times doesn't actually sound like a hell of a lot. 150 quadrillion times sounds like a positive match, doesn't it? The forensic scientist responsible, Susan Wittner, swore by her findings. But in 2024, during Watson's latest appeal, forensic expert Sean Doyle shredded that certainty with a single 22-page report. He concluded that basic contamination controls had not been followed. Gloves weren't changed, tools weren't cleaned, the lab notes didn't match the affidavit, and the hairs, they may have been introduced inadvertently from the very reference samples used to test against. Even Wittner admitted in court secondary transfer was possible. Emeritus Professor James Robertson, one of Australasia's most respected forensic minds, added that the lack of detailed lab documentation would make independent verification impossible. 2 anonymous witnesses came forward to testify against Watson, but later recanted their testimonies, saying they had been coerced by police. So what we're left with is this: the 2 hairs. The central forensic evidence in the case might never have come from the boat at all. They may never have been on blade. They may have never even been real evidence. What happened in the hours after Ben and Olivia disappeared remains unclear. Police later alleged that Watson murdered them on board and dumped their bodies at sea, but there's no timeline, no confessions, no recovered remains. And multiple witnesses describe seeing a yacht that doesn't match Blade, a larger vessel, the mystery yacht, with 2 masts, sometimes called, the mystery ketch. The ketch was seen in the inlet that night, then, like Ben and Olivia, it vanished. Police dismissed it, said it was a red herring, mistaken identity. But many in the public, and even some inside the justice system, they weren't so sure. In 1999, Scott Watson was found to be guilty of the murders of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. It's now been 27, and he's been denied parole 4 times. But almost immediately, doubts begin to rise. In 2020, the Court of Appeal heard fresh testimony questioning the reliability of witness statements and forensic evidence. And in 2024, Watson's legal team returned to court, armed with new scientific scrutiny that may prove fatal to the Crown's case. And at one point, even Olivia's own father expressed concerns that the police may have got it wrong. 2 young lives, a party in paradise, a boat that wasn't theirs, and a conviction that many believe should never have stood. If Scott Watson didn't kill Ben and Olivia, then who did? And how close did the real killer get to slipping into the night, unseen and forgotten, as the country moved on? The mystery of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope isn't just unsolved, it may have been solved wrong. I could go on and on and on about this case. I've got a few videos on it actually, and planning to do more. Go and check them out if you want to deep dive into it. A playlist will be linked to this video. And that is today's episode, the 100th Shadow Matter episode. Thanks for coming along and checking it out. An honourable mention goes to the Crew murder case, but if you've been to my channel before, you'll know that it's been repeated a few times before here, and technically it's an unsolved case. And I wanted to focus on the solved murder cases with controversy, but anyway. This has been New Zealand's most controversial murder cases. I've been Shadow Matter, and you've been awesome. Like, subscribe, and gently caress that bell icon like it's your girlfriend's birthday. And I'll see you here next time in the shadows. 100 episodes, man, whatever.